I'm tired. Those are the words repeatedly uttered by the West Australian Premier Mark McGowan after his shock resignation yesterday afternoon. He joins a trend of public figures and politicians who have called it quits recently, citing exhaustion.
But the truth is, I'm tired. Extremely tired. In fact, I'm exhausted. The role of political leadership doesn't stop. It's relentless.
I've got nothing left in the tank, and unless you can give 110% to the role of Premier, you shouldn't be doing this job, and I can no longer give more than 110%.
Just don't have enough in the tank for another 4 years. After going on 6 years of some big challenges, I am human. Politicians are human.
It became apparent, probably 2 weeks ago that the time was about right, and in all honesty, I'd rather leave too early, too late. The club means so much to me, and I want to make sure that I leave the game loving the game, not resenting the game.
Let's bring in Anya Johnson now, Associate Professor and Head of Discipline in Work and Organisational Studies at the University of Sydney, and also Co-Director of the Body, Heart and Mind in Business Research Group. And I really appreciate you making the time. Thank you. What are we doing to our leaders, not just in the political sphere, but as we saw there in the sporting world as well? And what should the rest of us take away from those experiences of people who are saying, I've had enough, I'm out of here, I just can't do it anymore?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and we could really hear the emotion in their voice, and the sense that they really are at the end of what they can offer. And I think there's a lot of humanity in what they're saying, and something that we should, I think, be paying attention to, because it's happening in organisations, across the whole economy, really. And certainly in the research I do, I see it a lot in health, a lot in social assistance, a lot in the caring economy. So it's not just the politicians and the high-profile sports people, it really is across the board. But it's a good question. What do we do? I mean, I think part of it is recognising that it's been an exhausting sort of three to 4 years. And if you've been a leader, and if you've been a high-profile figure where everything you do is is a performance, is visible to everyone, then really you're constantly having to invest emotional energy. You're constantly having to perform, and there's not a lot of backstage where you get to unwind, relax, debrief, do things that are lower level, that don't require the same level of emotional engagement. So I do think perhaps one of the messages that we're receiving is that we can't sustain high-level, high-intensity engagement as a leader at all times. We have to take proper breaks. We have to take time when we're not engaging at that level, so that we can have a sustainable career, and that's critical.
So, Anya, are you suggesting that burnout, exhaustion, is a sort of modern affliction that has been exacerbated by blurred home and work lives, being connected to technology? There was the COVID pandemic and the stresses associated with that. Or is it just that we're hearing more about it now, and that modern leaders, modern workers are more willing to acknowledge the challenges that they're facing and that they've had enough?
I suspect it's a bit of a combination of both. I don't think it's as simple as saying it's the result of everything that's been happening in the last 4 years. I do think it has been happening in the past. And I think, it's similar to sort of mental health challenges. I think we've become more vulnerable, vulnerable is not the right word, more willing to be vulnerable and to say when we're experiencing difficulties, or when challenges are just getting too much. So I think its norms have shifted in the workplace, and I think people are more willing and see themselves, if you are a values-based leader, then being vulnerable and being authentic and explaining what your situation is part of being that kind of leader. So I think we're seeing more of that come through. So I don't think it's that this has never happened before. Of course it's been happening. We've just been masking it. And I think now people are more willing to admit it. But because of the last few years, and perhaps, as you say, the level of technology, the blurring, the pandemic, all of that has created sort of a bit of a firestorm, and is really forcing people to own up to their vulnerability in this area, and having to take that step back in order to preserve their own well-being.
Because mental health-wise, burnout can be quite a dangerous thing, can't it? How do we identify that we might be suffering burnout before it gets to the point where you are just completely exhausted with nothing left in the tank?
Yeah, it's really important to be able to recognise it, and also as leaders to be able to see it in your staff, because there are times when really you need someone to take leave and to have a rest, to provide a bit more of support around what they're doing, to also make it easier for people to disconnect. So setting norms and expectations that people do disconnect for their own well-being, because if they don't, they're not going to be able to sustain their work. So in the long term, you will pay the price of not paying attention to people's burnout. And it's expensive, because organisations will often find that people will get to the point where they may not resign, they may just take stress leave, or they may go into workers' compensation. And then we're talking about a very long-term turnaround and a very expensive process for an organisation.
Some good tips there. Anya Johnson, really appreciate you joining us with your insights today. Thank you.
Thank you.